This work is funded in part by the Minnesota Humanities Center, with money from the Arts and Heritage Fund that was created with the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008.
Hello, I'm Mark Hughes. Coming up on today's show, Disability Viewpoints, we're going to talk about Medicaid. We're going to dedicate the whole half hour, and with me today is my special co-host and friend, Joan Wilshire.
Yep, it's going to be a fantastic show. We've got lots of great guests from organizations and individuals with disabilities as well, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned. It'll be the quickest half hour you've ever seen. Coming up next on SBNN, Disability Viewpoints. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about Medicaid and Medicare cuts here in Minnesota. Now, if you take the number 3 million, which we believe is a national number, that means that 18% of the disabled communities this will affect. And 18% is a small number, yes, compared to 50, 60, or 70, but 18% as a whole number is a pretty big number. So we want to talk about that today, and we want to welcome Joan Wilshire, who will go ahead and introduce our guests.
Great.
And we welcome our guests too.
Well, super. Well, we've got a wonderful guest here to talk about this issue that's concerning everybody, but most importantly to people with disabilities. So with me today is Jillian Nelson, Public Policy Director for Minnesota Autism. So welcome.
Thank you.
And we've also got Sumukha on the live Zoom, who is with the basically, he's a disability consultant for Minnesota Council on Disability, but he's on several boards too, so he's another expert here.
He's busy.
And a person with a disability that has used and is using Medicaid. And so our last guest here is Tina Rucci, Public Policy Director for ARC Minnesota. So welcome all three of you. And so I think we're going to get started with some of the basics for our viewers. What is Medicaid? Which one of you want to jump in and describe what it is?
So Medicaid is a national entitlement program. In the 1960s, the federal government set up a program to make sure that those who are most vulnerable in society always had access to health care. So we're looking at pregnant individuals, children, the elderly, and people with disabilities. And each state has a requirement to offer certain services within that Medicaid umbrella. And then there's the Medicaid expansion that allows each state to decide what additional services they're going to offer from, it's almost like an a la carte menu that CMS or Medicaid and the federal government has created. Minnesota is an absolutely foundational state in the Medicaid expansion. We provide incredibly vibrant Medicaid services for people with disabilities living in our state to allow them to be able to live and work and play in our state as independently as possible. So we have a lot at risk with this discussion federally because we do have such an incredibly vibrant program here in Minnesota.
It affects your community and your PCA care too.
It affects just about everything that people with disabilities depend on. It impacts, when we talk about disability services, for a person with a disability to access something like a waiver or a group home or a PCA, they have to be a Medicaid recipient. Myself, I'm a Medicaid recipient as well, and Minnesota is really unique in that we have lots of different ways people can access that system. We obviously have need-based, where you are a person with a disability, you have been diagnosed, your needs have been documented, but that comes with some asset and income limitations. We also have an amazing program called Medical Assistance for Employed Persons with Disabilities that allows working individuals like myself and like Sumukha to be able to access Medicaid services and be able to continue to be contributing members of society that go to work every day, earn competitive employment wages, and contribute to society in the way we choose to, not limited by financial limitations.
And I would also like to add, and rein me in if I'm going too far. He's good at that. Medicaid allows people with disabilities to be able to live in the community. And so I know Jillian just did a deep dive on the intricacies of Medicaid, but big picture, it just allows people with disabilities to be able to access services and be out in the community.
Yeah,
I
Medicaid can be as complex as like my life, being able to work and be independent. It can also be as simple as Medicaid allows a person to get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Medicaid allows people with mental health disabilities to access the medications they need to be stable. It allows children to be able to see doctors. It allows pregnant women to be able to get prenatal care so that they can safely deliver their children. Medicaid is a lifeline for every single person that it touches, and Medicaid is the difference between individuals with disabilities living in state-run institutions and individuals with disabilities being able to live in our communities. And in Minnesota, we don't have state-run institutions. So without Medicaid, there's nowhere.
There's no other option.
So with the cuts that are proposed to be coming forth, what can the disabled community do to kind of prevent some of this, or what services would there be if it happens?
This is a really complicated question. Right now, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. The estimates say that Minnesota could lose anywhere from 1.4 billion to 3.4 billion. And Minnesota has a lot of billion.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of choices on how we handle that. We can step up and increase taxes or shift our state budget to have state funding fill in the Medicaid gaps. We can do that by raising taxes, by any number of things. It could also look like Minnesota lessening the commitment to the Medicaid expansion. Right now, we offer a lot of services that we're not required to offer.
Really, like Medicaid is essentially the only funder of home and community-based services. So really, if there are cuts, there's no other options for people with disabilities. So I think that's the first point, like, I think that's worth mentioning. And then second, like, some of the proposals that are coming out, even recently, while maybe some of the more devastating cuts are still, I mean, they were not included, but of course they're still potentially up for debate. But even without the more devastating cuts, they're still projecting that at least 8 to 10 million people will lose their health care. So I can't underscore enough that this is a serious issue, that all the proposals being considered would essentially kick people off of their health care. And that's just not acceptable. And of course, even if, there will be claims that from some lawmakers that, we're not touching people with disabilities, we're not going after disability services. But if you cut funding, I mean, it's naturally going to impact benefits even for the groups that are that they claim are more deserving. But of course, that's not how it's going to work. I think some of the proposals, like work requirements, for example, while people with disabilities may be exempted from that, people would have to show proof that they have disability. So that's where it gets complicated. There's more red tape. So the state has to pay a lot of money, potentially millions of dollars, to administer a whole new system. And it's just burdensome for the person, the recipient, and it's really designed to kick people off of their healthcare and make it harder. And so it can still affect people with disabilities. There are people with disabilities who may not be accessing waivers, but are on Medicaid through the expansion population. So those people would have to meet work requirements, which is not possible because of their disability potentially. So that's kind of how these cuts affect people with disabilities, even if disability is not named directly as one of the groups that's being targeted. It's still going to impact our community. Another example is provider taxes. They're a primary way that states fund the Medicaid program. So if you limit those provider taxes, that's going to potentially make it hard to fund more expensive home and community-based services. So I guess that's kind of what I want to add, is the impacts are pretty significant.
The one thing I'd like to add is if you're a parent or guardian and your client or your son or daughter is got their own apartment and you see them going to work 5, 6 days a week, and then all of a sudden they're talking about these cuts, and the parents are starting to set up financially for retirement or maybe cutting back some of their hours at work a little bit, then all of a sudden some of this hits. It kind of does a 360 on everybody's world, and I think that, I hope it's an appropriate question, but I think it's a perspective we've got to take a look at too, is all of a sudden now, what do we do?
And the reality is that the Medicare cuts it will be the disability community that is hit the hardest. This is actually something that is going to be a devastating economic impact, not just to people with disabilities, but to our entire economy. When people with disabilities do not have the appropriate supports and services, they don't just magically stop being disabled. We continue to need health care, we continue to need things, and when we don't have the things we need, often those things become crisis situations. In those crisis situations, it's federal dollar or state dollars that are responding to those things. When we have people who are having mental health crises because they can't access their medication, their therapist, that increases the police calls. When we have people who are having medical crises without health insurance, hospitals are still required to treat them, and those medical bills get written off. And all of those things fall down into the state, into the county, into our communities. They increase our property taxes, they increase our sales taxes. When we lose employees with disabilities from employment, that means we have a lack of certain people working in various industries. And that damages our economy as well. Like, there isn't a single person in the state of Minnesota that would not be impacted by these Medicaid cuts.
Do we know the actual amount of people with disabilities that are on Medicaid or that use Medicaid?
I believe it's about 120,000. Does that sound
That
right?
seems
That's
low.
about how many are on the home and community-based services.
Okay, so that's what I'm thinking of.
But we do have a lot of other people that access Medicaid without the home and community-based services.
Okay, so that's
Sure.
the statistics that I'm
Yeah,
thinking
we
of.
are the largest, we are the second largest population accessing Medicaid right below children. But I don't have those numbers, I apologize.
And
Yes, it is.
we can follow up with actual statistics afterwards.
Right. Well, still, the number, I'm sure, is a lot. You know,
Plus the other vendor that it
Right,
affects in the
right.
state too.
So can we drill down at all, anybody, with more specifics of what you're going to, possibly what we would see being specifically reduced and eliminated?
Unfortunately,
Well,
no.
I think, I guess, I don't know if this is the right answer to your question, but I think for any viewers out there, if you know somebody with a disability, they will be impacted by these cuts. And
It's hard to say exactly how, because it will depend on what the state decides to do to balance out those cuts. We could result in having wait lists for waivers again, so that there's children and people with disabilities going without services until someone else essentially dies. We could see,
and that's the per capita cap that they're talking about,
Yep.
is only this amount of people in each state can receive these services.
yeah, they're also talking about the block grants where they say, okay, you have this many disabled people, we're only going to give you this many dollars per year per person. And what do? You look at someone and say, well, Mark, you've exceeded the $30,000 the federal government allows for us to care for you. So you're on your own until January when that resets. Like, that's not an option.
Oh, boy.
Those aren't options.
One of the challenges is like we don't know like specifically. I guess we don't know exactly what's going to happen. A lot of the discussion is like proposals, but I think we're starting to get a bit of a clearer picture. So like this week, actually, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is basically the committee that oversees Medicaid, they're actually starting to put their portion of the budget bill together, which would of course impact Medicaid. And so some of the things that they're considering mainly are like the work requirements, going after provider taxes, and just making it harder for people to enroll in Medicaid and keep their benefits, essentially. Increasing out-of-pocket costs for certain beneficiaries as well. So those are kind of some of the more, I guess, specific examples. As far as I know, at this point, and it's not to say they couldn't bring them back, but at this point, per capita caps and the reducing the federal matching rate for states, that is at the moment off the table. I don't know if they're still discussing it. They probably are, because there's different, I guess, arguments going around right now. So there's still a bit of uncertainty, but I think we are starting to get a clear picture, and that's what I was mentioning. Like, even though maybe some of the more devastating cuts are off the table, so it seems at this point, even the other policies would still kick off millions of people from their health insurance. So that either way, I just want viewers to know that it's not over. The fight is not over. Like, we have to keep advocating against these cuts, because even though maybe some of the more devastating things are potentially off the table now, it's still, these are pretty devastating cuts, even regardless.
Right.
So I think that's the most important point.
Let me just tell you what we do know that's updated information. We do know that President Trump is trying to pass cheaper prescription drugs, and we do know that Senator Abler and Senator Hoffman are working on a new medical program, healthcare program called Trellis. It's been in our local news here, and we'll cover that another time, but I do want you to know that that's looming and it's out there.
I mean, I want to just kind of address the decreased prescription cost. I personally feel that this is very much a distraction tactic to distract us from the major elephant in the room, that we are looking at $880 billion in cuts that are going to impact Medicaid and Medicare, because we are protecting the tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. That we are balancing this budget on the backs of those who are most vulnerable in our country to protect those with the highest excess wealth. And that somewhere along the way, our current administration, including many of our contingency from Minnesota, have deemed this an acceptable practice. That we are willing to take from a community that has lived for decades and decades in forced povertization to have access to the services and supports they need, to allow the most rich in our country to continue to get richer by not contributing to our taxes.
The real problem has been this, that we haven't demonstrated to enough people that we can work, we contribute to society, we can buy houses, we can buy cars, and some of us like cars. Yes, we do. But you know, we can contribute. And that is really agonizing or irritating, for a polite word, after working all these years and having quietly done some of that, that they think we can't, because we can.
Yeah, you
Absolutely can.
absolutely, we absolutely can, and that's the narrative that we are working so hard to change at the Capitol, because the people who are in power and making the decisions need to understand that.
There are more people with disabilities paying taxes in America than there are millionaires and billionaires paying taxes in America.
Say that again, that felt good.
There are more people with disabilities in America paying taxes than there are millionaires and billionaires in America paying taxes.
There you go.
Astounding. Well, now let's move forward with talking about what can we do, and looking at resources to give people here, the viewers, to figure out what's next for us.
You can
That's-
become a nuisance.
That's
Call
Yeah.
your legislators in DC. Send letters. Do it every single day. Keep calling them and saying, I want to make sure that my legislator is supporting us, that they are voting against Medicaid cuts, that they are supporting people with disabilities, that they are protecting Medicaid for our state. And we can't just call once and hope that they hear the message. We have to call them again and again, send letters, tell your neighbor to send a letter, tell your postman to make a call. Every single person that cares about you as a person with a disability should be reaching out and saying, this isn't okay.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you know somebody with a disability, this is going to impact them, and by extension, you. And all policy is disability policy. You know, we don't show up at the Capitol to just talk about human services and waivers. We show up in the transportation committee and the housing committee. We want to make sure there's affordable, accessible housing for people with disabilities. Education, the special education space. And I think that to answer your question, which I think is a really great question, it's just so important for people to keep disability justice front of mind in any space that they enter in order to make sure that people with disabilities are not forgotten, not left behind.
And I mean, and honestly, if you don't care about people with disabilities right now, that's fine. But you should still be making these calls, because this community is the only marginalized community that has open enrollment. You may not care about disability today, but you can step off that sidewalk tomorrow, get hit by a car. You could get struck by lightning. Your kidney could just stop functioning, and all of a sudden, you're one of us.
Yeah, I mean, the first one is, like Jillian said, calling your members of Congress, making sure you're very clear about how their decisions can impact your life and make it very difficult. Because we've spent a lot of time today talking about how Medicaid cuts would affect people with disabilities, and even all sorts of other groups that benefit from the program. So I think hammering that message over and over again, even though it's tiring, it's still very important to do that, and to keep that going. For some people who prefer to email, they can do that as well. And I would say, like, a lot of organizations have action alerts that they send out to people that make it easier for them to call or contact their members of Congress. So, like, if you belong to a specific group, for example, I have, my disability is muscular dystrophy, so the Muscular Dystrophy Association is what I look to just keep updated about everything that's happening, and they also send out action alerts. ARC does it. Minnesota Council on Disability also has Medicaid action alerts, and we have a Medicaid page where people can find resources and just updates about what's happening. I know ARC does a good job of spreading the word. Autism Society also does that. Those are kind of the organizations that you can look to. And then, of course, if you know about rallies or anything like that, like in-person events where you can share your story, I think that's another place where you should show up, because people tend to take notice when a lot of people are at the Capitol, or it's the more people that show up to some of these events, the bigger the impact it would have. And then also share your story on social media. Make sure people know about how Medicaid affects you. Regularly post on social media. You can even write letters to the editor or op-eds or things like that, so you can educate the broader community. So there's a number of ways like people can get involved. It's just a collective effort, so everyone has to do their part if you want to protect this program. And so I guess that's kind of going off of what was already said.
So in summation thereof, here's what he said. He said, if you choose not to speak up and be part of your voice in the decision-making, then you'd take whatever's dealt or whatever there is. If you choose to speak up and you're part of the voice in the decision-making, then you might be able to see the change being made. And I think it's that simple.
Well, and I think some people may be intimidated if they don't belong to an organization. And I think that can be what do I do? Because I don't belong to an ARC Minnesota or Minnesota Autism. So I think knowing that these resources exist, like Sumukha said, I think is helpful. And it's, I think, a good thing to know that everyone's voice, no matter if you're with a group or not, is vital.
Exactly. You don't have to be necessarily be a person with a disability to, join the community and speak up for it.
But thanks for helping us.
Yeah, this isn't a right side or left side issue. This is simply a right or wrong issue. And regardless of if this is going to directly impact you, you can still say, I'm not okay with this.
Right.
That we want human beings to be treated like human beings, and we want people to be okay.
Yes, so we had a rally last weekend. Oh my gosh, session just flies by. These days just fly by during legislative session. we had a rally to support maintaining funding for Medicaid and all other disability services. And we had Senator Jim Abler speaking, we had Representative Kim Hicks, we had Senator Tina Smith, and we had a ton of self-advocates and other community partners. These cuts that are being proposed at the federal level would defund the Minnesota Disability Law Center. They would defund the Institute on Community Integration.
The Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities.
The Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, and we just want to make sure that the disability community remains supported.
Yeah.
And so that's why we had that rally, and I'm really grateful that you're going to share some photos.
Okay.
It was a really great gathering too, because especially coming from the autism community, and there's been a lot of really hateful rhetoric specifically around the autism community recently, and being able to gather in community and lift each other up and find that unity. And my primary message when I spoke was, we can win this together.
Yeah.
Being
Absolutely.
together was a very healing event to know that even though things seem very scary right now, that as a community we are standing unified and together.
We're standing tall.
We're strong.
Hey, Joan, you got to talk about a great one we lost the community, Marge Goldberg.
Right, huge loss in the community. Marge Goldberg, former executive director of Pacer Center. She has been an institution, she herself, creating Pacer Minnesota since the late 60s. And she passed on and is living a great legacy of Pacer Center to work with many kids of all sorts with disabilities. And so we just wanted to make sure we thank her for all her great work and the legacy that she's leaving. So,
Samara, very quickly before we go, a final thought. Do you have a final word?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of wanted to echo what was being said. I think we really talked about a lot of ways people can get involved in the importance of some of the events that are happening, like the rally that happened. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. I think.
Okay. Hey, thanks for being with us today. Thank all our guests, Tina, Jillian, Joan. Thanks everybody for being here. Most importantly, thank you at home for watching. We'll be back next time with more Disability Viewpoints. For now, I'm Mark Hughes. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. Well, that's our show for today. We covered the whole half hour on Medicaid, but we think it's useful information and information you need to know. Joan.
it is fantastic, 30 minutes. We kind of condensed Medicaid down in a quick 30 minutes, but I think we've got the gist out there of let's get out there and speak on our behalf, and we count.
And we had 3 guests that really know their stuff, so we thank them for being here too.
Right.
We'll hope you watch next time on Disability Viewpoints. I'm Mark Hughes for the entire team. Thanks everybody for watching. Bye for now.
This work is funded in part by the Minnesota Humanities Center, with money from the Arts and Heritage Fund that was created with the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4, 2008.